Hello everyone and welcome back to another Theory Thursday. So this one is going out to all my Night Lord fans out there, as today we're going to be discussing Sevatar, the first captain of the 8th Legion Astartes, the Night Lords. The legend that first uttered the immortal line, "Death to the false emperor," and one of the most deadly marines of his time. He was right up there with the likes of Sigismund, Abaddon, and even Causeway. Truly, this guy is an absolute legend of the Great Crusade and Horus Heresy. Now, I bet you're thinking, this guy must be absolutely running riot in the current setting of Warhammer 40k. Well, unfortunately not. So, that begs the question, where is he? But before we dive in, I'd just like to mention that if you like what I do, then just let me know with a simple like. Leave your thoughts down in the comment section below, and if you're new, subscribe. It's there, it's free, and welcome aboard. So, with all that being said, let's dive into this theory. For those of you that know Sevatar, you will understand what a phenomenal character this guy is. And even though he didn't make a huge impact on the overall setting of the Horus Heresy, he still left a lasting impression on those who read about him. But for those of you that don't know, let me explain. Jago Sevatarian. Not sure it's pronounced Jago or Jago, but take your pick. Also known as Sevatar, or to those his closest companions and the Primarch Conrad Kurz, they called him Sev. He was born on the dark, crime-ridden world of Nostromo, which is kind of like the city of Gotham, but just dialed up to 11 and just across the entire globe. He was introduced to the Legion and swiftly rose to the rank of first captain of the Night Lords. This granted him the right to lead the Akramentar. They were the elite Terminator group within the Legion, and after some time, they grew to respect Sevatar greatly, and would execute his orders without question or hesitation. They respected him and showed such amount of loyalty to Sevatar, so much so that they would tend to take orders only from Sevatar. Sometimes Kurz, of course, but mainly it came from Sev. No one else could boss them around. He was also the head of an elite group known as the Chiroptera, which is a council of officers that's come together from across the Legion. It's very similar to the warrior lodges of the other legions, but it has a much better sounding name. Not only that, but he also was the trusted advisor of his gene sire Conrad Kurz, who first gave him the nickname Sev, which I think is a really, really great example of their friendship and their trust between each other. And it's something that you don't often see amongst many of the other legions, and this is a level of friendship and compassion coming from Conrad Kurz, of all people. So being the first captain of the first company of a legion is a huge deal. You have to have proven yourself to a ridiculous level just to become a regular captain, let alone the first captain. He was also a grand tactician for a Night Lord anyway, and a brutal combatant. So much so that he is the only one to have ever beaten Sigismund in a duel. And Sigismund, he is one of the finest swordsmen within the Imperial Fists, but also within most of the other legions. Now, granted, the end of the duel, he was technically disqualified by headbutting Sigismund, but I mean the fight lasted for well over 48 hours at this point, so he had to win at some point. But he wasn't only just a combat master, but he also had latent psychic powers since he was a wee boy on the streets of Nostromo. However, he didn't really know how to control them, so what he did is that he tried to suppress these powers within the back of his mind and train himself to kind of keep it there amongst kind of like mental wards and that sort of thing, because sometimes when the psychic powers would come out, it would invoke bleeding from the nose, the ears, sometimes the eyes, and it would cause him to black out because he wasn't in full control. So he's tried to lock them away. What his powers were exactly isn't really known, However, given that his Primarch Kurz had precognitive powers, it was most likely some form of ability to glimpse into the future. So here we have a legendary warrior at the head of one of the most elite companies of the Legion, commands the elite Atramentar Terminators, and is a close companion to their Primarch Conrad Kurz. And GW is trying to tell us he died off screen somewhere? No. I'm not buying that. But before I go into speculating what might have happened to this legend, let's take a look at his final moments that we know of, that has been recorded in books and I believe a short audio drama as well, so let's have a look at that. During the Horus Heresy, the Night Lords were sent to engage the Dark Angels by Horus to effectively keep the Dark Angels busy while Horus marches on terror with most of the other traitor legions. This was known as the Famous Crusade, where both sides were taking a lot of heavy losses, and it was relatively even, and then the Night Lords started to turn the tables in their favour. That was until the final moments of the Crusade, when the Lion pulled some Dark Age tech nonsense to ping-pong his feet around the Night Lords and took a massive chunk out of the Night Lords Legion. And it was a brutal defeat. However, before the end of the Famous Crusade, Kurz and the Lion duelled for a considerably long amount of time, but it ended in the Lion winning victoriously over Kurz. He was then dragged away and taken aboard the ship. He was so brutally wounded that he had to be resuscitated 39 times by the apothecaries and the Night Lords. I mean, they were trying their best, as none of them have ever operated on a Primarch before, because their physiology is vastly more advanced than even a Space Marine. But they did manage to resuscitate him. He was breathing, but he wasn't fully conscious. This is where Sevatar visited him on the operating table, and with one last final effort, he tapped into his latent psychic powers and transferred himself into the mind of Kurz. When he was there, Kurz was replaying some old foggy memories of when the Emperor first arrived on Nostromo. And once Kurz found him, they talked for a while, and then Sevatar ended with berating Conrad Kurz, stating how he could have done better, basically. And how Sevatar was very much disappointed with his actions thus far, and how he could change, but Kurz was adamant, stating that fate was inevitable. But he managed to bring him back, at least awake. And then once he woke up, the crazy bastard decides to jump straight onto the Dark Angel's flagship, beamlining it straight for the Lion to get some revenge for almost killing him. And this is where Sevatar also wakes up, after he had blacked out from using his psychic powers to try and get into the mind of Kurz. But let's face it, I think we'd all need a nap after getting inside Kurz's mind. Kurz then communicates with Sevatar telepathically, stating that he needs to finish this fight and wants him to join him. So with a sigh, Sevatar then sends his Atramentar to join Kurz. During this, there's a massive fleet battle, and he can't safely get from where he is on the Night Lord's vessel onto the Dark Angel's flagship. So what he does is that he maglocks his boots onto the outside of a Void fighter craft and gets him to fly him straight into an open hangar in the Dark Angel ship, which I think is absolutely amazing. Once on board the ship, he is then able to carve through Dark Angel Marines to eventually get to Kurz and the Atramentars and the other warriors that had jumped via the teleportation. And they were putting up a good fight until they got surrounded and the Dark Angels advanced to slowly close the noose around them. After Sevatar had broken the wards within his mind to jump into Kurz's mind, the powers were starting to take their toll, and his mind couldn't contain his psychic powers any further. He starts to bleed out from his nose and his ears. He's feeling very faint, he's feeling very slow, which is very unlike him. He thinks this is very, very strange, all this happening. And then the darkness starts to close in from around his vision, and he blacks out. Once he wakes up, he finds himself locked inside the Dark Angel's flagship in a cell. This vessel is heading to Macragge, and he's alone there by himself. However, he gets caught by some of the guards trying to escape by using his, I can't remember what gene implant it is, but it's basically when your saliva is acidic, and he is starting to escape by using his acidic saliva to spit a hole through the wall. The guards catch him, and he says, "Rats did it. Big ones." Which I think is absolutely hilarious. He tries to blame it on rats. He was then moved to a bigger cell with some of the surviving members of the Chiroptera, and they discuss their dire situation that they find themselves in. During this, they planned another escape, which almost worked, but they couldn't get off the ship safely. So he was then sent back to a lone cell, where his psychic powers were doing some serious mental damage to him. However, soon he was contacted by a young woman called Altani, who was part of the astropathic choir on board the ship. She manages to comfort him and soothe his mind. But after their back and forth talk, it was then later discovered that Altani had been punished for communicating with Sevatar, as she was caught out by the Master of the Choir. Her punishment? Well, the Master of the Choir broke both her legs, effectively paralysing her. Once Sevatar knew about this, he was enraged at the injustice of this. So, while the Dark Angels were trying to transfer Sevatar to a prison ship, Altani managed to use her powers to take control over the Marines, which allowed Sevatar to butcher them and to head straight to the astropathic station. Once he enters the astropathic station, he finds the Master of the Choir that had beaten Altani. He rips him out of his chair and begins choking the life out of him. Sirens blare, Dark Angel Marines thunder into the room, bolters leveled at Sevatar as he delivers his final quote and breaks the Master of the Choir's neck. "I am justice, I am judgment, I am punishment, and I surrender." We next find him back inside a cell, his mind fracturing after spending most of his life trying to keep his psychic powers locked up, but now they roam free about his mind. Then something interesting happens, detailed in the short story The Long Night. A feeling of cold, cold focus that had eluded him for decades. When he dreams now, it is not of the dead, but of the endless night between worlds. The deepest void where 1,000 threats drift from the light of loyal suns. The dominions of aliens and monsters, forced into exile by the Great Crusade, still crying out to be extinguished once and for all. The true threats to mankind. "Diego," the voice comes to him again at last. "Are you still alive?" And in the darkness of his cell, Sevatar smiles. And that's all, folks. That's the end of Sevatar's story, so far as we know. Or is it? So it is mentioned in the Conrad Kurz Primarch novel that when Sevatar had entered the mind of Kurz, he said that he knows how Sevatar would die. Sev never liked Kurz telling him such things, but he told him anyway, and that he would die in battle. Now, this statement is fairly predictable in most cases, as we know that Kurz is able to see the future of quite a few Primarchs' deaths before, so his ability is pretty spot on. And the fact that, you will die in battle as a warrior is a little bit cliche, but he was able to predict at least a future for him. So knowing this, and knowing how we last saw Sev on board a prison ship, as the screen faced the black, where was his final last stand in battle? Why was, in GW's eyes, he swept aside and quietly killed up screen? Why didn't this vision come to pass? Now this is where we get into the realm of speculation, and as much as I do love my dear Sev to return to the era Indomitus, I don't think that GW would ever bring him back. But by going on the basis of no body, no death, we can come up with a few ideas of what might have happened to this legend of an Astartes. One possible theory is that he was on his way to Terra to answer for his crimes, but then on his way, he was then contacted psychically by Malcador the Sigillite to become one of the Knights Errant, to aid in founding the Grey Knights and combating against the demonic forces of chaos. This theory is backed up by the fact that he is repulsed by demons and demonic corrupted marines, and this is really nicely shown in a very short scene in the novel The First Heretic, where Sevatar is disgusted by the creation of the Galvorback and actively spits at their feet. There is another theory that I have, which is that he's still on board the prison ship, and the prison ship ends up following the Dark Angel's fleet back to their homeworld after the Heresy. And amongst all the chaos and the confusion of who's traitor, who's loyal, with Luther firing up at the fleets and then the line firing down at the same time, Sevatar manages to escape along with Altani. The two of them manage to board a small craft and they fly out into the void. This is where Sevatar starts to prowl the void, slaying the monsters between the stars, as he had looked at and was sort of described in the story The Long Night, how he's kind of looking between the stars at all the unseen horrors. There they come across fractures, small groups of Night Lords that were sent out into the void to claim their own victories, and this is where their company would start to grow. They denounce chaos and the Imperium. They strike out at the horrors unseen by the wider galaxy to defend mankind. And over time, they would become expert hunters of the void, slaying foul aliens and beasts. Like great ocean predators, they silently stalk their prey and strike with brutal ferocity. Thus, they become the chapter known as the Carcharodons, with Sevatar being their Void Father. So this aligns well with the fact that there's something not entirely right about the Carcharodons chapter, and most fans have speculated that their gene seed is either part or entirely of Night Lord stock, or at least a chimeric gene seed where it's mixed with the Raven Guard. Or another theory, which is pretty tame, is that he had been delivered to Terra and is locked up in the dungeons beneath the Imperial Palace, or he managed to get to Macragge and he's down there within the cells somewhere beneath Kelp. But that's kind of boring, isn't it, really? Because he's just been sat there for 10,000 years. I know it's not very imaginative and it is kind of boring, but at least there's something there, and maybe he died in a cell or was given something, some kind of redemption. But I like to think that he was able to make it out and had that final last battle, thus completing the vision that Konrad Curze had for him, which is why I really quite like my theory on them becoming the Carcharodons and Sevatar being the Void Father that's mentioned within the Carcharodons lore. If you don't know much about them, then I highly recommend looking them up online. There's probably most likely some lore videos on YouTube as well, because they're a massive fan favourite chapter. And a lot of people do speculate where their gene seed comes from. So I quite like the fact that it is at least part Night Lords, because if you look at some of their art, they are really, really gruesome, really pale, very, very dark eyes. Like the disfigurement kind of nature, looks very, very evil looking. Very Night Lordy, I might say. Especially with the whole like diving in from the void, from the black, to strike really quickly, silently, and then jumping back out again. So the fact that this man, who embodied what a Night Lord should stand for, was equal to some of the most deadly warriors of the Great Crusade. So I know that this was a bit of a sort of short, kind of going over like his backstory and kind of mainly focusing on the theory side of things, but now you have a good idea of who Sevatar is. And the fact that this man, who embodied what a Night Lord stands for, was equal to some of the most deadly warriors of the Great Crusade, a man who was highly respected within his legion, and was the first captain, was just quietly shuffled off and swept under the rug. I mean, no, I don't agree with this. Because either it's a lack of respect to the character on Games Workshop's part, or they've intentionally left Sevatar's death a mystery, so then they can release him later on down the line. Now, initially I was excited by the release of the frankly awesome looking Night Lord models last year, and a part of me was hoping that they might expand just a little bit more into the Night Lord's range, and maybe give us a little hint of a potential 40k Sevatar model, but sadly that wasn't the case, and I was just up on hopium. But being a huge Night Lord fan, and the fact that you have this legendary warrior just fade away, I was hoping that they would bring something, you know, just give us a hint, just give us something. I mean, Aaron Dempsey Bowden, he writes the Night Lord so well, and he also wrote the short story The Long Night, and I gotta say, they've got to bring back Sev, or at least give us like closure to what had happened. And it's strange because I don't really see many people talking about how Sevatar ended online on really anywhere, really. I mean, I've came across like a couple of theories here and there deep within some forums, but you got a lot of fans for obviously Abaddon and Sigismund, and you've got Rauderon of the Blood Angels, you got Corswain, massive, you know, huge fan base for them, but there's not many fans for Sevatar, and he was equal to them, if not sort of better than some of them, at least. So, yeah, we need more love for Sev. We need more love for the Night Lords. That's what it is. This is a campaign to get more love for the 8th Legion, I tell you. But yeah, so let me know down in the comments below if you agree with my theories. Let me know which theory was your favourite, and also let me know if you have your own theories as well. And also, would you want Sevatar to return in 40k? I mean, I know I would, but part of me thinks they might get his character wrong. I don't know. I'm in two minds, but I think at least give us closure to what has happened to him. So if you enjoyed this video, then let me know if you want to see more like this by enacting judgment on the like and subscribe button, and share this with your friends. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, stay safe, stay beautiful, and we'll see you all next time.